Hi, welcome to our daily encounter. Today we begin the book of Daniel, and Daniel is a contemporary of Ezekiel, the book we just finished. And he is mentioned in 2 chapters in Ezekiel, which would be no surprise given the social status that Daniel had, the popularity that he would have had. God mentions Daniel in Ezekiel 14 when he puts him on the same status as Noah and Job. He says, even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were in the city, he would still destroy it. He would still destroy the people because of their wickedness, but he would spare Noah, Daniel, and Job. And so even before we get into the book of Daniel, having read the book of Ezekiel, we can see that Daniel was a man who had a lot of favor by the Lord. He's also mentioned in chapter 28, his wisdom is spoken about in connection to Tyre in chapter 28. But here he is, he's held in comparison, or actually on equal status with Noah and Job. And these were men that overcame adversity. Noah was a man who was in the midst of evil world. The world had become completely evil. As a matter of fact, only Noah really found favor in the eyes of the Lord because he had remained obedient. And so he was the only one, him and his family were the only ones saved from the flood. And Job was a man who overcame adversity, tremendous adversity. The trial that he undertook was the greatest trials that possibly that a man could ever undertake, just about. And so, but he overcame it through his faith. And then we have David here. He's right there with them, a man in the midst of a cruel, powerful nation, being close to kings, which put him in a very dangerous predicaments on several occasions. And yet he still remained true to the Lord, still remained faithful and obedient to God. And so as we read the book of Daniel, we can do 2 things. We can put ourselves in this story and, kind of compare ourselves. How would we respond with these situations that Daniel had to go through? Secondly, we can be inspired. We can look at how Daniel responded, also his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, better known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And we can be inspired by their faithfulness to the Lord. As a matter of fact, for our devotion today, we want to focus on these 4 men and see how it is that they were tested. And we'll find that many times our testing, the testing of our faith, oftentimes comes from these same types of trials. For instance, in chapter 1, we see the official coming to Daniel and telling him he had to eat the king's portion, which he had to drink the wine and eat the king's meat, because they wanted these guys to look healthy. And he wanted to show that he was taking care of these guys. And Daniel didn't want to defile himself. So he said, you know what, just give me vegetables and water and I'm good. And the man's like, hey, you're going to have me lose my head over this. You know, please eat the king's portion. And Daniel says, hey, let me eat vegetables for 10 days and then come back and check on us. And if we're healthy, then we're good to go. And sure enough, that's what happened. Matter of fact, they looked even better than the rest of the people. And so we see that we see temptation in really several forms just in this one story. One, through the temptation to conform to what everybody else is doing. Daniel had to stand up and be different. Everybody else was eating the king's portion. Everybody else was going along with what was commanded of them. But Daniel stepped out and was different. Also, this was a temptation for pleasure. You know, think about how tempting it would have been to eat that good food that would come from the king himself, which would have been the best food probably in the kingdom. And it would have been, a temptation perhaps for Daniel to just eat the meat and eat and drink the wine just because it was good food, and it would have tasted good to him. But he resisted. He resisted the temptation to conform. He resisted the temptation to take on pleasure. And many times the world wants us to do that. It offers us pleasure through perhaps entertainment, many other things that serve to distract us, maybe even things that aren't sinful, but things that distract us and pull us away from the Lord and get us on a different track. But also the world always wants us to conform. They want us to act the way that they want us to act. They want us to get in line with what everybody else is doing. And it takes bravery and it takes courage to stand up and say, no, this is my beliefs. This is what the Lord has commanded me to do, and this is what I will do. And so Daniel shows a great example of enduring faith, even in the first chapter. But then we also have this famous story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, with the fiery furnace. Remember, after Nebuchadnezzar had this dream about this image, and Daniel interprets it, and it has, the head of gold, and it has the silver, and then the bronze, and then the iron legs, and the iron mixed with clay feet. Well, he goes and makes an image in chapter 3. And some would suspect that maybe this image was in connection to the dream. Maybe he was so taken aback by this great vision that he received that he built a statue about it. Don't know for sure if that's what it was, but we do know that it was an image, and that he commanded everyone that when the music played, they were to bow down to the image. And of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said they weren't going to do it, and they didn't do it. And so Nebuchadnezzar has them thrown into the fiery furnace. And as they're in the furnace, they look inside, and they say, wasn't there just 3 people in there? And they saw that there were 4. And so they were protected while in this furnace, and they come out, and their hair isn't even singed, and they don't smell like smoke. So it was a clear miracle, which was a testimony to the true and living God. And so they held on to their faith with the temptation of physical harm. Over the past centuries, there has been many times in which Christians have had to undergo physical persecution. Not just the intellectual persecution that we see in our country today, not only the political pressures that we see today, but actually outright physical persecution, threatening the very lives of Christians. And we see that happening quite a bit over the span of the world, even today. And that oftentimes does happen. And here we see 3 men in the midst of that type of situation. And they have a decision to make. Do we save ourselves, or do we stay true to what we know to be true? And do we place our trust in the Lord? Well, as the story plays out, as mentioned, they are saved, and they become a great inspiration to us about standing firm on our beliefs, even if it means physical harm or even death. So, we see these great examples of a person enduring and standing up for what they believe with the temptation of self-pleasure. And then we also see these 3 men standing up for their faith, what they believe in, being obedient to the true and living God, during the temptation of self-preservation. And so we can look at these stories and be inspired and place our trust in the Lord. The same God that was their God is our God as well. And if they could trust the Lord, and if they could stand up for what was right because of the Lord, shouldn't we be able to do the same today? And so we need to pray that the Lord will give us the faith, that He'll give us the strength, that He'll give us the ability to endure the pressures that we can oftentimes receive from our own society. So these are just some things to think about. Hopefully they were helpful to you today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.